Hey guys, this is Charlotte with, I'm going to just say Strategic Roots Initiative. And I hope that you have a little bit of time because I'm going to read you a dream. He's speaking to me, and I believe he's speaking to the body of Christ through an experience that I had 2002. So I want to share this dream with you. This is called the Army of God. I had an experience on 2002. 1 year after the Twin Towers fell. While I was sleeping, I saw the future. I believe I saw the future. I believe this has something to do with the wind blowing around the country also. This is called 9/11 Dream. On Wednesday, September the 11th, 2002, exactly 1 year from the event of 9/11, 2001, I was resting on my couch and fell asleep with my new baby. I was watching the memorial service as I was falling asleep. Just before I fell asleep, I remember people were being allowed to enter the circle of remembrance. A strange wind began to kick up upon the people. I especially remember a fellow walking over and stepping inside the circle. He was holding a can. He bent down and scooped up some dirt and put it in the can very tenderly. The camera focused on this one person as he gently scooped the dirt inside the tin. It was so touching. As I was lying there resting, I began to become sleepy. It was about 9 o'clock and I fell asleep. This was the experience that I had while sleeping. As I slept, it was the same exact service I was just watching on television moments ago. All of a sudden, the announcer of that same station I was watching before began to speak and say, "Oh God." He said this several times in a row. Then he said, "He's taking them." I felt and knew people everywhere were watching the same program I was watching and knew they were. Television land, people and the announcers and all of us began to see the wind kick up and swirl. Suddenly, a shell of a building rose from that foundation I could see. The foundation of this building was the soil. It was very tall. This building had openings for windows. The openings were squares. They ran along the front of the building. There was no glass at all. Then I heard the announcer say, "He's taking them up. God is taking the people up to heaven himself." When he said that, I saw God's wind or breath blow down around the sides of the building and pull up all the molecules or particles of humans that were never exhumed from the rubble, or could it be? He gathered them inside of this brown building. His breath pulled up the soil in such a mighty wind that the presence of God was indescribable in that wind. The soil spirit of something I can't explain itself. I watched through the television, began to cry out and weep at how God himself was showing the world his power. I remember the soil was the same color as the medium brown building. At the top of the soil stood peaks. These peaks were of different sizes. Some peaks were taller than others. These peaks pointed towards heaven. When I woke up from the dream, the program was still airing. Only about 10 minutes had passed. And you know how you feel when you take a deep sleep and when you wake up fast, you don't know where you are? That's how I felt. Well, I woke up watching the program and didn't know that I had woken up. I had woke up. It's hard to explain. I couldn't understand why everyone on TV was so somber. After a minute or two, I realized I was watching the program that was on before I fell asleep. Maybe it was a trance. I'm not sure. I know that I was taken into the future and saw something spiritually that I can now understand. I felt the breath of God on me for the rest of the day. That night at service, I descended to, on that next, it was the next Sunday after that, Wednesday night that happened. I was given a note written by a friend. She wrote in the letter after service Wednesday night. I went home and turned on CNN. They were doing a recap of the day's memorial service in New York, Washington, Pennsylvania. When the reporter Bill Hemmer did his lead on New York service, he said something about the wind being so strong there at ground zero. Then he said it seemed like to him like heaven took a deep breath and then exhaled over them. I thought it was standing in the light of the dream you had shared with us previous to Wednesday night. Here is the dream interpretation. I looked back at my dream, coming to Christ in these last days. In the dream I had, the announcer began to speak and say in a loud voice, "Oh God." I believe this speaks about people crying out to God. Many people crying out and calling on the name of the Lord. News media will not be able to deny what God is doing. The next portion of the dream I remember is the announcer saying, he's taking them all to heaven himself. He's doing it. It's just like a sovereign act. He's doing it himself. I believe the news media will have an encounter with God. I clearly remember, even to this day, that were people in their homes watching the scene, and people on the streets stopped to watch how God had caused a tremendous mighty wind to stir on the land. This wind was so fierce that it couldn't be mistaken as just a storm. It was more than a storm. It was God's hand moving. It was a wind of sanctification, a wind that was blowing in the land, breathing life into hard hearts. The strange thing that stood out to me was that God was not hiding. He was doing this thing out in the open streets. It was as though God was allowing great exposure to take place, and the supernatural power of God was being revealed. This took millions of people by surprise, including the announcers. This wind glory couldn't be misinterpreted or misrepresented by the mass media any longer. God himself was doing it. It was an open display. It was an open show. It was not a pastor, preacher, ministry group. It was not a gospel service or any other Christian event that was held that made this mighty wind begin to blow. It was God himself, his hand, manifesting his power and glory on the land. It's happening now. He's heard the cry of the people cry out, "Oh God!" This move will have great media coverage because now it will be God. They will be using the terrorist attacks of 9/11 to prepare for something in the future. This was a futuristic dream. This move of God's hand is happening right now. It's going to turn the nations of the world. He's using the terrorist attack of 9/11 and COVID together to reveal himself, the shell of the building. The shell of the building represents the building of the people rising from the dust. It's not a man-made structure. This structure is not built with hands. It began man-made of the people rising from the dust. It's not a man-made structure. This structure is not built with hands. It began made. It had been built from the cry of the people saying, "Oh God!" I think square opening was prophetic. I think they represented the windows of heaven. These windows ran along the front of this very tall building. There was no glass in the window openings. He's taking the glass boxes and crashing them. Also, I believe it represents many eyes will open in these last days. There could be no man-made substance seen on or in this building coming up from the soil. As this form began to rise, the announcer said, "He's taking them up." God is causing his people to rise, and that began to stir up around the shell of the building. The wind began to kick up and stir. Then I saw the soil begin to rise and gather. He gathered the soil inside of this brown building. There is a company of people beginning to rise. As the brown building rose up, the soil around the outside of the building began to gather on the inside of the building, and it too began to rise as the building began to rise together. A great revival of souls will be coming into the kingdom. His breath, Yadhe Shinbavhe, pulled up the soil in such a mighty wind that the presence of God was indescribable in that wind. We will see God's hand. The people of the soil stood up upon their feet. Dead men bones rising, army, a mighty wall of prayer intercession. I remember it was a wall about 3 feet thick and taller than the building itself. The real church is rising. The real church is arising. It's the real church. We are 10 feet tall. The wall was the same color and made of the same soil as the building. The foundations are being raised up. I remember this dream as though I had it last night, and it's been all those years ago. The top of the soil there was peaks. These peaks represented mountains. The peaks were of different sizes and levels, and some were taller than others. These peaks pointed towards heaven. I believe this represents the mountain of God's government that will be seen in our land. They are pointed towards God. This represents this sign right here with my index finger and my thumb represents the finger of God. It represents his authority, his rule. the rod of God. Psalms 3:7, it says, arise, O Lord, save me. Oh my God, you have smitten all my enemies on the cheek. You have shattered the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. Selah. Revelations 12:11. They overcame but because of their testimony and did not love their lives unto the death. Matthew 25. Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you. Genesis 2:7. Tell us that when God had formed the first man of the dust of the earth, he breathed into him the breath of life, and the man lived. Preach to these dry bones. Say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will make breath enter you, and you will live. I will attach tendons to you and cause flesh to come upon you and cover you with skin. You will come to life, and you will know that I am God Almighty. Ezekiel 37:5. Hope for the mountains of Israel. As we are under his canopy of love, and I do believe his canopy of love is risen up over us, all the nations of the earth. It is as though we are under his hand or his breath. I saw his hand motioning, summoning the army. His hand was in the air as a banner. His hand was moving the wind and saying, arise, arise, arise.